Lakota chief was grieving his wife on the mountain. A runaway bride healed him and found family. The fire had been dead since morning. I knew it was dead. I'd watched it go out, watched the last coal go gray around the edges, and then all the way through. And I hadn't moved. Just sat with my back against the rock wall, and my knees drawn up, and the cold coming in slow through the hide walls. And I thought, good that it's cold. Good that there's nothing warm in here. That was the second winter. Second winter since Winona. The first one I'd gotten through on anger, which is a fuel that burns hot but doesn't last. I was angry at the sickness that took her. Angry at the medicine men who couldn't stop it. Angry at the sun for rising the morning after she stopped breathing, like the world had somewhere else to be. That anger kept me on my feet, kept me leading the council, kept me making decisions about horses and winter camps, and where the young men should hunt. I was still a chief. I was still the man the people looked to. For 11 months after she died, I was still all of those things on the outside. And then one morning in late summer I woke up and the anger was just gone, used up. And underneath it there was nothing. That's when I came up here. I told the council I needed a moon's time alone on the mountain. That is not unheard of for a man of my position, a man entering a certain season of life. They nodded. Chayton. He was my second. A man I'd known since we were boys chasing rabbits in the creek bottom. He held my eyes a moment longer than the others. He knew me well enough to be worried, but he didn't say it. Among my people, you don't say it. You let a man carry what he has to carry. I told myself I'd go up for a moon and come back changed, the way you come back from a fast. Emptied out and then refilled with something clearer. I'd done it before, when I was young, when I was first finding my way. The mountain had given me things then. That was 4 months ago. I hadn't gone back down. I'd sent word through a boy who came up once with dried meat. I was staying longer. That's all. No explanation. The boy looked at me with his big solemn eyes, and I could see he'd been told not to look alarmed, and was working hard at it, and I almost smiled. Almost. The fire was dead. I had meat I hadn't touched, hanging from the ridgepole, and I wasn't hungry, which meant my body was starting to make its own arguments. I knew the signs. My hands had gone thin over the knuckles. My ribs were showing through the skin. I knew all of this, and I looked at the dead fire, and I thought, I don't know how to want to fix it. Said Z. She would have taken my face in both her hands, and she would have said my name. Not chief. Not the name they use in council. My name, the small one, the one only she used. And then she would have looked at me until I looked back. She had that. She could make you look at her. She had eyes that were very dark and very still, like the deep part of a river. And when she looked at you, there was no hiding from what she saw. She'd been dead 14 months and I still reached for her in the dark. I was thinking about that, about the specific weight of her, the warmth of her back against my chest. When I heard the noise outside, not an animal. The step was too light for deer, too uneven for a man who knew where he was going. Somebody stumbling. Somebody making the kind of noise that comes from not knowing they're making it is a different kind of noise than the kind that comes from not caring. I didn't move for a breath. Old habit. You don't move toward noise until you know what it is. Then I heard her hit the ground. Not a fall exactly, more like a slow giving out, a crumple, and then nothing. No sound of getting up. I was outside before I'd decided to go. She was about 20 feet from the entrance, face down in the snow. White dress. Which told me something right away. A woman in a white dress on a mountain in November tells you a story before she ever speaks. The dress was torn at the shoulder, and the hem was soaked through. She had no coat, one boot. The other foot was wrapped in what looked like a piece of curtain tied with kitchen twine. I got to her and turned her over. White woman. Young. Mid-20s at most, though fear and cold age of face. Dark hair loose and matted with ice. Her lips had gone a color that worried me. She opened her eyes when I turned her. Brown eyes, glassy, not quite focused. She looked at me and she didn't scream, which surprised me. Most white women in her condition finding a Lakota man's face above them on a mountain in the dark. They scream. She just looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, very quietly, "I can't feel my foot." "Which one?" "The right. The curtain one." "Of course." I picked her up. She was lighter than she should have been, which meant she'd been running for longer than just today, burning through herself. She didn't fight it. Just put one arm around my neck and let me carry her. Her face turned into my shoulder, and I felt her shaking. Deep shaking, the kind that comes from somewhere down in the bones. I carried her inside and set her near the fire ring, and then I built the fire back up. First time in 2 days I'd built it. My hands moved through the motions without me having to think about them. Gather the tinder, strike the flint, coax the small breath of flame. I was watching the flame catch when I realized my chest had shifted somehow, some loosening of something that had been locked. I didn't know her name yet. I didn't know what she was running from. I just knew that building the fire for her was the first thing I'd done in 4 months that had a reason behind it, and the reason was not grief. I got her foot uncovered, the curtain and the twine. 2 of her toes were a color that could go bad. I got snow and rubbed it against the foot, which she endured without making a sound, though her fingers dug into the hide blanket I'd put under her. Then I wrapped it properly and put it close to, not too close, the fire, and I made broth from the meat I hadn't touched, and I watched her drink it. She got some color back. After a while she said, "My name is Clara. Clara Holt." A pause. "I was supposed to get married to who? A man named Aldous Briggs." She said it the way you say the name of a disease. "He owns half the county. He's 61 years old, and he smells like hair oil, and he has never once asked me what I think about anything." You ran, in the middle of the ceremony. She looked down at herself, at the ruined white dress. I got as far as the livery, and I took my father's horse, which I'll feel bad about later. That horse is 15 years old, and doesn't deserve this. And I rode until the horse threw a shoe, and I couldn't ask him to go further, so I let him go, and I walked. She looked up. "I walked a long time. You walked 2 days into the Black Hills with 1 boot." "I had 2 boots at the start." She said it simply, not as a complaint. "The other one came off in a creek crossing. The current took it." I looked at her. The firelight was doing something to her hair, drying it out, lifting it from her shoulders. Her jaw was set in a way I was starting to recognize. She was a woman who had decided something, and had moved from the deciding into the doing, and had not looked back, even when the doing cost her a boot and half her feeling. "Why did you keep going up?" I said. "Most people. They lose a boot in a creek in November, they go back." She was quiet a moment. "I couldn't go back. If I went back, I'd end up married to Aldous Briggs." She paused. "I'd rather lose both boots." I handed her more broth. She drank it. Then she looked at me, direct, the way she'd looked at me outside in the snow. "What's your name?" "Takana." "What are you doing up here, Dakota?" Nobody had asked me that. Shh. Not directly. Chayton hadn't asked, and the boy with the dried meat hadn't asked, and the mountain itself, whatever the mountain was, hadn't asked either. It had just held me the way a mountain holds everything, without judgment, without insistence. "Grieving," I said. She nodded. No flinching from it, no rushing past it to something easier. Just the nod of a woman who understood that grief was a real country, and that some people live there for a while. "Who?" she said. "My wife. How long ago?" 14 months. She looked at the fire. "I'm sorry," she said. And that was all she said about it. And somehow that was exactly right. We slept on opposite sides of the fire. I didn't sleep well. I don't sleep well. Haven't since Winona. But I heard her breathing even out after a while, and I was glad for that. The night was cold, and the wind came under the hides a few times, but the fire held. In the morning she was up before me, which surprised me. She'd found the dried meat on the ridge pole, and she was cutting it into smaller pieces with my belt knife. She'd just taken it from its sheath, without asking, which struck me as either very bold or very practical. And she had snow melting in the clay pot. She looked up when I moved. "I hope you don't mind." I thought about asking, but you were asleep and the meat needed to come down before it froze solid. She held up the knife, handle toward me. Also, I borrowed this. I see that. She went back to the meat. Her foot she'd rewrapped herself. Not as well as I'd done it. Better than curtain and twine. Her hair was dry now, loose down her back, and in the morning light I could see the color of it, which was a dark reddish brown, the color of creek water over red clay. You should go down today, I said. She didn't stop cutting. Probably. Foot needs proper attention. Probably, she said. Again, I waited. She kept cutting. Are you going? I said. She set the knife down and looked at me, and I saw something working in her face, something coming to a point. I'm trying to figure out where, she said. That's the problem. I can't go back to my father's house because he'll just send me back to Aldous Briggs, and I can't go to town because everybody in town works for Aldous Briggs or owes him money, and I don't have kin anywhere closer than Ohio, and I don't have money to get to Ohio, and I don't. She stopped herself. I'm sorry. That's not your problem. No, I said. But you brought it in. She looked at me. Then a small sound came out of her, almost a laugh. It's down tight before it could become one. That's fair. She picked up the knife again. I'll figure something out. I always do. I watched her work. Her hands were steady. Her jaw was still set. She'd run from a wedding, walked 2 days on one boot, through a mountain snowstorm, lost 2 toes to frostbite, and hadn't cried once. And now she was up at dawn, cutting meat with a borrowed knife, and trying to figure out where to go next. Voice of when she said she'd figure something out had in it no self-pity at all. Just a plain statement of fact about herself. She was a person who figured things out. Winona had been like that. Not in the same way. She was quieter, deeper, moved through things like water, moves through stone, slowly and completely. But she had that same quality of not asking the world to be easier than it was. I don't know why I noticed that then, I just noticed it. We ate. Clara was careful not to take more than her share. After we ate, she took the clay pot out and refilled it with clean snow, moving on her good foot and the wrapped one, testing her weight on it, and I watched to see if she favored it hard. She did, but not as hard as I expected. You can stay until the foot is better, I said. She came back in and set the pot to melt, and she looked at me for a moment. I don't want to be in your way. You're already in my way, I said. The question is whether your foot can take the walk down. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one pressing from underneath. All right, she said. A few days then, if you're sure. I said it. You did. She sat back down and looked at the fire. Thank you, Dakota. I didn't answer. I went to the entrance and looked out at the day, at the gray, white sky and the pine ridge, and the snow that had settled heavy on everything overnight, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 months. Not happiness, not relief, just present. Just here, in this particular morning, the cold on my face and smoke behind me, and a strange woman's voice inside my shelter. I was alive. I was noticing it. The foot kept her 4 days. I told myself it was the foot. She moved around on it more carefully on the 2nd day, and by the 3rd, she was putting real weight on it, and by the 4th, she could have made the walk. I knew that, and she knew that, and neither of us said anything about it. She had a quality I didn't expect, which was quiet. Not the quiet of a person with nothing to say. She talked, sometimes long stretches of it, stories about where she was from, about her mother who died when she was 12, about the school she'd attended for 2 years before the money ran out, about a dog she'd had called Preacher, who she'd taught to open the barn door, about what Ohio smelled like in June. She had an ease with silence, too. A comfort in it, the way a person gets comfortable with silence when they've had to be a great deal alone. She could sit across the fire from me for an hour without talking and not make it awkward. Most people can't do that. Most people fill silence because they're afraid of what lives in it. On the 2nd day, she asked me about Winona. We were outside, Clara, sitting on the flat rock near the entrance, her face tipped up to a thin patch of sun, and I was mending a piece of tack and she said, without looking at me, "Tell me about her, if you want. You don't have to." I didn't answer for a while. I was working the awl through the leather, feeling the resistance of it, the push and give. "She was from the Brûlé," I said eventually. "Her father was a headman, not a chief. We met when I was younger. Her father didn't want it. He thought I was too fierce, too quick to anger. He wasn't wrong." Clara was looking at me now. "She overruled him," I said. "She came to me herself and told me she'd decided. Father was still arguing with my father about horses and she'd already decided." I felt a corner of something move in me. She was like that. She didn't wait for permission. She looked at a thing and made up her mind. "Sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was the best person I've known," I said. Plain, the way I'd say the sky is that color, better than me. She was patient where I wasn't. She saw people clearly and didn't hold the seeing against them. She had a laugh. I stopped. "What about the laugh?" Clara said. "It came out of nowhere sometimes. Like she was surprised by it herself. You'd say something ordinary and she'd laugh, really laugh, and then look embarrassed that she laughed. I spent 30 years trying to make that laugh." Clara had her hands folded in her lap, and she was looking at me with her dark eyes steady, not moving toward me with it, not pulling away from it, just receiving it. "She got sick in January," I said. "Cuffing sickness. It goes through a camp and takes different people different ways. Some it takes fast. With Winona it was slow. 8 weeks. Long enough that you could tell yourself every morning it might turn, and then every night it hadn't." I pushed the awl through. She knew, though. She'd known longer than I did. "She had that patience I told you about. She used it then. She was preparing herself and letting me pretend there was nothing to prepare for, because she knew I needed the pretending." The wind came down the ridge and moved through the pines above us. She said to me, 3 days before. She took my hand and she said, "You are going to grieve wrong. And I'm telling you now so you can't say I didn't warn you." I paused. She knew me. What did she mean? Grieving wrong. She meant I'd go somewhere alone and stop eating and let myself get thin and cold, and she'd hate that. I looked up from the tack. She'd hate this. I hadn't said that out loud before. I hadn't even let myself think it quite so directly. But it was true. Shh. I could hear her voice on it. "You are going to grieve wrong, Lakota." I could hear the fondness in it, the exasperation, the love braided through all of it. Clara didn't say anything. She looked at me for a moment, and then she looked back at the mountains. After a while, she said, "She sounds like someone who earned the right to be grieved this hard." "Yes," I said. "She did. I think she'd want you to go back down." It wasn't said to wound. It was said the way you say something you've been holding for a little while and decided was worth saying. Straight, and with the same jaw set she used for everything. I went back to the tack. I didn't answer, but I thought about it. On the 3rd night, it snowed hard, and we stayed inside almost entirely. And she told me more about Aldous Briggs, not with anger, more with a kind of dissecting curiosity, like she was trying to understand the mechanism of him. "He's not a cruel man," she said. "That's what makes it strange. He's not cruel, he looks at a woman the way you'd look at a piece of furniture. Useful, pleasant enough if it's in good condition. He's had 2 wives before me. The first one died, and the second one just left her children and left. I only know this because our housekeeper told me. My father never mentioned it. Your father arranged it. My father is a man who owes Aldous Briggs a great deal of money and had a daughter of marriageable age." She said it without bitterness, more like the way you state a mathematical fact. "He loves me, he does. He just loves his land more, and the land was going to go to Briggs if I didn't marry him." A pause. "I don't blame my father. I just wasn't willing to pay that particular price. So you ran." "So I ran." She looked at the fire. "I've been running from things most of my life, if I'm honest. From the poverty after my mother died. From the smallness of the life my father had left. I thought if I could just get far enough from one bad thing, I'd land somewhere better." She paused. I haven't been very strategic about it. You were strategic enough to survive 2 days on one boot. She looked up, and that thing that was almost a smile came back, and this time it made it all the way. Brief and real. I suppose I was. I had not seen a woman smile in 14 months. Not a real smile. The kind that comes from something actually being funny or true. I had been surrounded by faces that watched me carefully, trying to gauge how I was. And their care was genuine and I couldn't feel it. It all just bounced off whatever I'd become up here, on this mountain. That smile landed. I looked back at the fire before she could see that it had. She caught me on the 4th morning. I was outside before first light, the way I always am. I don't sleep well. I've said that, and I was standing at the edge of the flat ground where the mountain dropped away, and you could see the valley below in the dark, just the suggestion of it. A deeper darkness with a few lights in it. The town of Garrett's Crossing 6 miles down. I was thinking about going down. I'd been thinking about it since the 2nd day. Since she'd said Winona would want me to, and the thinking had a shape I recognized from other times in my life. The shape of something you've already decided, but haven't admitted yet. Like a river that's already changed course underground, still finding its way to the surface. I didn't hear her come up behind me. She moved quietly for a woman with a bad foot. You're thinking about going home, she said. I didn't turn. What makes you say that? The way you're standing. You're looking at the valley. A pause. And last night you ate the last of the meat. You haven't been eating much for. I don't know how long before I got here. But last night you ate properly and I thought, that's a man who just decided to take care of himself again. I turned then, because she deserved me to look at her when she'd said something like that. She was wrapped in one of my blankets, her dark hair loose, and the light was just beginning at the edge of the ridge. The kind of gray-pink light that comes before the sun shows itself. She was looking at me with those brown eyes, direct and steady. And she wasn't moving toward me, wasn't pushing for anything. Just standing there in the early cold, seeing what she saw. You should go back to your people, she said. They need their chief. You know that. I know that. And you've been ready for a little while, I think. You just needed. She paused. I don't know what you needed. Something to pull you back into the present tense. I thought you. That's what I needed. Not her, specifically. Not this woman in a ruined white dress with frost in her hair. But what she'd brought in with her. The necessity of her. Particular fire. Of having to build a fire for someone. Having to make broth for someone. Having to wrap someone else's frost-bitten foot and stop thinking, for a few hours, about what you'd lost. I didn't say that. I wasn't sure yet what it meant. Where will you go? I said. She hugged the blanket tighter and looked out at the valley. I've been thinking about that. And I have nothing down there. I can't go back to my father. I can't go to town. I have no money and the clothes on my back which are. She looked down at herself. Not ideal. No, so. She took a breath. I was going to ask you something. I've been working up to asking it. I waited. She turned her face back to me. You have a people. A community. And you've been gone from them for 4 months, which means they've been managing without a chief. And they've been worried about you. And when you go back there, will be things that need doing and things that need deciding and. She stopped, gathered herself. What I mean is there work in your camp for a woman like me? Any kind of work. Cooking, mending, tending the sick, teaching the children letters if any of them want them. Whatever is needed. I'm not proud about what form it takes. I just need somewhere to be that isn't here and isn't there. She nodded toward the valley. I looked at her for a long moment. To come with me. I'm asking if there's a place for me. That's not the same thing. She said it carefully. I'm not asking to be taken in out of charity. I'm asking if there's useful work I could do in exchange for food, a place to sleep, time to figure out what comes next. The morning light was strengthening. I could see her face more clearly now, and what I saw there was not a woman asking to be saved. She'd made that clear with everything about how she'd said it. The terms she'd set, The work she'd offered, the way she'd distinguished being taken in from being useful. She was asking to trade, not to receive. Winona would have liked her. The thought came before I could stop it, simple and clear. Winona would have looked at this woman, and it's exactly what I was seeing, and she would have liked her very much. There's a woman in our camp named Far, I said. She's a healer. She lost her apprentice last spring to fever. She's been working without help. I paused. She'd put you to work on the first morning. Clara's chin came up slightly. I can learn. She'll expect you to. A beat. Is that a yes? That's a yes, I said. She breathed out, and in the cold morning the breath made a small cloud, and she closed her eyes for just a moment. Not relief exactly. More like someone setting down a weight they'd been carrying so long they'd stopped, noticing it, and now that it was down, they could feel the absence of it in their shoulders. Thank you, she said. You're thanking me wrong. You offered a trade. She opened her eyes. That almost smile came back. I suppose I did. She looked out at the valley. When do we go? Now. We pack and we go now. And so we did. The walk down took most of the day. Clara's foot held. She didn't complain about it. I watched for limping and saw it. But she never mentioned it. She asked me things as we walked. About the camp. About the people. About the council. And how it worked. About what the winter would bring in terms of hunting and movement. She listened to the answers with the same attention she gave everything. Taking them in and filing them. Once she slipped on an iced-over stretch of trail and I caught her arm, just the reflex of it, and she steadied and said thank you without making anything of it. Just steady, keep moving. We came down out of the pines in the late afternoon and into the valley where the camp was. Not Garrett's Crossing. We went south of that. Along the creek bottom to the winter site, the cottonwoods bare-branched above the lodges, the smoke rising. I saw the camp dogs come running first, and then the children, and then I saw Chayton. He came out from between two lodges and stopped when he saw me, and he just stood there for a moment. He was a tall man, Chayton, broader than me, now that I'd gone thin on the mountain, and he had a face that didn't move much. The 4 months hadn't changed that. But something came and went in his eyes when he looked at me. Something that was there, and then put away again, and I understood it and I let him put it away. He looked at Clara, back at me. Chief, he said. Chayton. I looked around the camp, the lodges, the horses on their line, the smell of wood smoke, and cook-fire meat. I'd been away from all of it for 4 months, and now I was back in the center of it, and it was pulling at something in my chest. Mine, these were my people. I had been away from my people for 4 months, and I had not understood, until this moment, how much that had cost me. We'll talk tonight. I need to see Far first. Chayton's eyes went to Clara again, briefly. The healer's there. A nod toward the east side of the camp. We walked. People watched. Some children fell in alongside us, curious about Clara, who looked back at them with an openness that surprised me. No hesitation. Just looking, taking them in. One small girl reached out and touched the hem of the white dress, still visible under my spare blanket, and Clara looked down and smiled at her, real one. Far was outside her lodge, scraping a hide. She was a small woman, brown and weathered, and somewhere past 60, quick dark eyes that moved over Clara like hands over a surface, feeling for what was there. I made the introduction. Then I said, she has some knowledge, she'll learn the rest. Far looked at Clara for a long time. Then she said in English she had some, picked up over years. Your foot. Clara blinked. My foot? The right one. You wrapped it wrong. Clara looked down. I thought, come inside. Far stood up, set down her scraper, and went inside her lodge. After a moment Clara looked at me, and I saw something in her face, a kind of recognition, or satisfaction, or both. Then she followed. I stood outside for a moment. The sun was low. The camp sounds came back to me. The particular sounds of this particular place. Children and dogs, and the low talk of women at work, and somewhere a horse shaking its head on the line. The bells I put there rattling. All of it. I stood in it and breathed it. Chayton came and stood beside me, and we were quiet for a little while, the way men are quiet who have known each other since they were boys. After a bit, he said, "You look terrible. I know. You need to eat." "I know." Another silence. "The council will want to see you tomorrow," he said. There are always things. Yes. A pause. "I'm glad you're back." I didn't say anything. I put my hand on his shoulder for a moment. "Tss, the way you do with a man, who is your brother in every way that counts." And then, I took it away, and we walked toward the fire. That was the beginning of it. The beginning of what came after. I won't tell it all the way through. Some of it is mine to keep. But I'll say, enough. Clara worked with Walks Far that winter, and the old woman was not easy on her. Walks Far was not easy on anyone. She had opinions about medicine and about patience and about the right way to do almost everything, and she expressed these opinions directly, and at length, and Clara absorbed them with a gravity that Walks Far seemed, grudgingly, to respect. I would see them in the evening sometimes, Walks Far talking and gesturing, Clara listening with her whole body, turned toward the old woman, asking questions that were, I noticed, good questions. Questions that showed she'd been thinking about what she'd been told and had pushed on the edges of it. She learned some of the language. Not quickly. It's not an easy language for ears that have only known English, but she was stubborn. But about it, and by midwinter she had enough to get the children talking to her, which meant she got more practice than most adults would. Children loved her. There was a particular boy, maybe 8 years old, named Cha. I won't give his full name. That's his to give. Who attached himself to Clara the way a particular kind of boy attaches to a particular kind of person. He'd lost his mother 2 summers before, and he was a quiet boy, a boy with a lot of inner life that didn't often make it to the surface. Clara saw him. The way she'd seen me, that first night, without rushing it or making a thing of it, she just saw him and created a place near her, where he could be. I watched this happen from a distance, as I watched a lot of what Clara did that winter, carefully, without letting myself understand why I was watching. There were decisions to make through those months. The council, and I had things to settle that had been suspended while I was on the mountain, and I threw myself into them, the way you throw yourself into water when you've been dry too long. It felt good. It felt like being myself again. There was a dispute over winter hunting ground with another band, and we sat and talked through 3 days of it, and settled it, without bloodshed and with something like fairness on both sides. And when it was done, Chayton looked at me and said, "We needed you." And I took that in and let it matter. I was needed. I had forgotten what it felt like. Walks Far told me in early spring that Clara had the right hands for this work. That was the highest thing Walks Far would say about anyone. Right hands. She said it to me as a piece of information, without warmth, and then she went back to her work. But I understood what she was telling me. She was telling me the woman was staying. I'd known it for a while by then. Clara had stopped talking about Ohio. She'd stopped talking about what comes next. She talked about the spring camp and about the plant medicines she wanted to learn to gather, and about the patterns. Walks Far was teaching her for the beaded pouches. She talked about the boy Cha and what she'd noticed in him. She had rooted. I don't know when I understood what that meant to me. It came in quietly, the way the real things come. Not a rush of feeling, not a moment of clarity, just a slow understanding, like a stone coming to rest at the bottom of a current. I would come in from a long day, and she would look up from whatever she was doing and say something about how the day had gone, and I would notice that I had been heading back here, to this particular fire, to this particular person. I told myself it was too soon. I told myself it was the gratitude speaking, the way men sometimes mistake rescue for love. There was something in me that had known her for a long time before I admitted it, and it wasn't gratitude. It was clearer than that and steadier than that. It was the feeling of, this is the right person to talk to. This is the person I want in the lodge when the dark hours come. This is the woman I want beside me. Winona would have known. She always knew things before I did. I told Clara in June. We were walking along the creek. She was collecting something for walks far, some plant that grew along the bank, and I had come along. Without a reason, I admitted to myself. The evening light was long and gold, and the water ran clear over the stones. I stopped walking, and she went a few steps further, and then stopped too and turned. She had some plant material in her hands, and she was looking at me with those brown eyes that I had come to know very well, patient and direct. I want to tell you something, I said. All right, I'm not good at. I stopped. Started again. I've been watching you this winter. I've been noticing what you are. She was very still. You came up that mountain with nothing, and you asked for nothing except to be useful. And then you've been exactly that, here, with these people, who you didn't know, and who didn't know you. You've been, I was looking for the word, present. You've been present in a way that I wasn't. I learned that from watching you. Dakota, I'm not finished. She stopped. I want to ask you if you would consider. I paused. If you would consider staying. Not the way you're staying now. In my lodge. As my. Another pause because the words in either language felt inadequate. As my wife, if you'd have me. If you'd want that. The evening sounds continued around us. The water over the stones, a bird somewhere in the willows. The distant voices from the camp. Clara stood for a long moment looking at me, and I could not read what was in her face, and I had learned not to rush what I couldn't read. Then she set down the plants she was carrying. She walked back to me. She was shorter than me by about half a head, and she tipped her face up and put both her hands against my chest. Not holding me, just resting them there, feeling whatever she was feeling, and she looked at me. I've been trying to figure out, she said, how to say this to you without it coming out wrong. Say it anyway, it comes. I came up that mountain running from something, she said, and I found you. And I thought, when I first thought about it, I thought, don't. You're rebuilding yourself. Don't hang anything on this man. Don't let a man become the reason you stayed somewhere. She kept looking at me. And then I kept not leaving. And I kept waking up, and the first thing I thought about was what I was going to tell you about the day before. A small pause. Shh. And at some point I understood that it wasn't that I was staying because of you. It's that this. She pressed her hands more firmly against my chest. This is home. You and these people and this ground. This is the first place I've been that felt like home since my mother died. Yes, I said. So yes, she said. Yes, Dakota. I'd want that. I put my hands over hers, both of them, her small hands under mine, and I held them there against my chest for a while, the way you hold something you haven't been sure you'd get to hold again, without crushing it, just keeping it. The water ran over the stones. Shh. The light went long and gold across the grass. I thought about Winona, the way I will always think about Winona when something good comes to me. I thought about her voice, and the patience of her, and the laugh she had that surprised even her. I thought about her saying, "You are going to grieve wrong." And then I thought about what it would mean to finally have grieved right. To have gone through it all the way, to have come out the other side not the same, not unhurt, but standing, a man standing. Clara was looking up at me, those eyes, still and brown and steady. I brought her hands up and I held them both between my two hands, and I looked at her, at this particular woman who had walked into my mountain on one boot in a wedding dress and made me build a fire again. All right, I said. Right. What I want you to know, the thing I've spent all this time trying to tell you is this. I didn't look for her. I wasn't ready for her. By every measure of how a man is supposed to do things, the timing was wrong, and the circumstances were wrong, and there was no reason it should have. But you can't plan who comes to you when you're at your lowest. You can't plan who looks at you, really looks, not at what you were or what you led or what title you carry, and sees what's actually there. A man, a tired, hollow, eaten man sitting next to a dead fire, and then decides, no, I'm not leaving him here. I have been a chief for a long time. I've been respected and feared and consulted, and I know the difference between people who value the position and people who value the person in it, and most of the time what you get is the position. Clara valued the person. That was the whole thing. That was all of it. She stayed through a winter, in a place that was new and strange to her, and she learned the medicines, and the language, and the children's names, and she earned her place in it, and she did it without ever asking me to notice. She just did it, and I noticed. Walks Far told her she had right hands. The council came to respect her, which is not a thing that happens easily with outsiders, white or otherwise. The boy Cha came to call her. Well, he came to call her something. That's between him and her and me. She found me on a mountain where I was doing my best to dissolve, and she made me build a fire. And then she kept making me build it. Not by asking me to. Just by being there to build it for. Winona would have liked her. I know it the way I know a lot of things Winona would have felt, because I was married to that woman for 30 years, and she lives in me the same way the mountain lives in me. Stone and root, and the particular smell of pine in cold air. She doesn't go away. She lives in me, and she gives me certain clear views of things if I'm willing to be still enough to. And what she gives me, when I look at Clara. When I see Clara come in from a day with Walks Far with her hair escaping its braid and mud on, boots, and something she learned that day already shaping itself into words, so she can tell me about it. What Winona gives me is simple. She gives me, yes, he needed this. Go. And so I went. We were married in the fall when the cottonwoods turned. It was a Lakota ceremony, because that was whose ground we stood on and whose sky was above us. And Clara stood in it with her chin level, and her eyes clear, and said what she had to say in the language she'd been learning all winter, careful and serious and correct, and Walks Far, who does not cry at anything, turned away for a moment to look at something in the middle distance. The boy Cha stood with us. He stood between us, because that's where he'd put himself. And I looked down at him, and he looked up at me, with his dark solemn eyes, and I thought, well, there's that too. There's this too. There is always more than you expect, if you can be pulled back into the present tense long enough to see it. I was pulled back. She pulled me back. That's the story. That's all of it. The cottonwoods are turning again now. I'm telling you this in the fall, for the second fall since we married, and the light through them is the same gold it was the day we stood in the ceremony. That thin, clean fall light that doesn't last long before the cold comes in. Clara is inside. I can hear her and Cha talking, some ongoing argument they have about the names of plants, which he contends he already knows, and she contends he mostly knows, but keeps getting two of them backwards. And the sound of that argument, low and familiar and with laughter underneath it, comes through the high wall, and I sit in it, the way I used to sit in the cold. Except now I sit in it, because I want to. Because it's warm and it's mine, and I earned it. I earned it by not letting the mountain keep me. She earned it by not letting me let it. That's all a man can ask, I think. Not to be rescued, not to be handled, not to be managed into feeling better. Just a good woman who looks at what's real in him and refuses to let it go to waste. She is a good woman. I'm a fortunate man. The cottonwoods are turning, and I'm going to go inside now.